Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. So Lebanon, very complex topic, one that I think is should be weighing heavily on everyone's minds. And it's hard to begin to figure out where to start with Lebanon, because the matter is so complex and there are so many moving parts. But let's start on October 8th of 2023, which I think that's where the current crisis erupted, and that's where we are. It's brought us to where we are today. October 8th of 2023, as we recall, Hezbollah launched a support front, as they call it, for their allies in the Gaza Strip. Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who the day prior had launched a murderous rampage throughout southern Israel, murdering 1,200 Israelis, civilians, and soldiers. Hezbollah balanced its act, though. Right? They didn't go all in. For years, we'd heard about these nightmarish scenarios that would happen, that in the next Lebanon-Israel war, the third Lebanon war, thousands of rockets would rain upon northern Israel. That there might be an incursion by Hezbollah's elite Radwan force. That this would be a war of unprecedented destruction upon the Israeli home front, something that the Israelis had not experienced since 1948 during the War of Independence. This didn't materialize. Hezbollah balanced its responsibility to Lebanon, which had been undergoing a financial crisis for about 5 years. So you don't want to be the person to bring a destructive war of unprecedented destruction onto a country that's been cash-strapped, desperate for 5 years. So they balanced that with their duties to the broader resistance axis, this Iranian-led regional alliance that includes Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It's a mistake, therefore, to view Lebanon and Gaza, formerly Syria or Iraq, as separate, Yemen now as separate fronts, or separate battles. These are separate. These are fronts in the same battle. But Hezbollah is stuck between these two battles. So what they do is they start a war of attrition. They want to redirect Israeli resources, Israeli forces to the north, keep Israel bogged down in the north as much as possible, on the hopes that the fear of this larger Hezbollah war will prevent Israel from steamrolling through Gaza, from going through Gaza as quickly as possible, and destroying Hamas as quickly as possible, in the hopes that a ceasefire will be reached prematurely when it comes to Gaza, so that Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and allied groups will survive, be able to rebuild, and be able to act on their promise to attack Israel again and again and again and again in the future. This obviously did not materialize. The Israelis waited patiently. They cooperated with international actors, the French and Americans, to achieve a ceasefire deal in the north that would decouple Lebanon from Gaza. This was Hezbollah's vow. They would fight until Gaza, the war in Gaza stopped, and the Israelis were pushing to have these decoupled so they could focus on Gaza. Even though the ceasefire deals fell far short of both Israel's security needs when it comes to what's going on in Lebanon, and Lebanon's international obligations, and we'll get to what those are in a second. Nevertheless, the Israelis persevered up until September 17th of 2024, when they decided to flip the equation. And now there have been contradictory reports as to why that happened, right? There's a pager off. This is the famous pager operation, obviously. Why did the Israelis choose that time? There were some reports that said that this was an operation that had been a decade, at least, in the making, and that Hezbollah had started to get with what was going on. They finally, I guess, one operative started to look too closely at one of the pagers and had sent some to Iran for inspection. So it was a use it or lose it moment. So the narrative goes. Who knows? Definitely we know that Israeli patience ran out. This is not a sustainable situation. Almost 100,000 people displaced from the north, unprecedented destruction visited upon the north. No answer to some of the weapons platforms that Hezbollah were using. Anti-tank guided missiles used as snipers. There's simply no answer to that. Iron Dome is ineffective to counter that. And the Israelis have no other system to deal with it. You had drone swarms that were being fired at the north as well. Again, Iron Dome, entirely ineffective. So the Israelis, it seems like, decided we're done, and put into motion several plans based on exacting intelligence that they'd spent, it seems, 18 years at least collecting, right, since the last Lebanon war. And it starts with Operation Beeper, then it goes to Operation Walkie-Talkie the next day. Within a couple of days, the entire leadership of the Radwan force, Hezbollah's commando units, basically Hezbollah's Delta Force, as they're perceived to be, was wiped out. And then days later, the coup de grace, if you will, the Hassan Nasrallah is assassinated on September 27th, if I'm not mistaken. So, and this portended escalation. Right? This is a demonstrable shift in the Israeli approach. After that, within days, you have a limited incursion into South Lebanon, an intensification of the aerial campaign in Lebanon, destruction of Hezbollah's assets. I mean, to the point where, as far as we know, Hezbollah, so at a certain point throughout the war of attrition phase, up to September 17th, even shortly after that, Hezbollah was daily updating the number of their dead. And then at a certain point, they stopped. And a colleague of mine and I theorized as to why that was. Did they want to hide the number of their dead? Did they not want to demonstrate to their followers and to their enemies the magnitude of their losses? It seems to me that they couldn't even tally the number of their dead. That's how intense the Israeli strikes were. And now, if you follow Hezbollah's media, they are slowly revealing how many have been killed, not in the systematic manner that they did before, but kind of finding a person here and a body there. So the Israelis visited untold destruction on Hezbollah. This was not 2006. 30% of their fighting force was destroyed, as far as we know, according to the Israelis. 70-something% of their arsenal has been destroyed, including critical assets. So Hezbollah is stuck as this is happening. Right? On the one hand, they have their words, which is, we're going to fight until Gaza stops, until the war at Gaza stops. On the other hand, as long as they're fighting, the Israelis are finishing or visiting this unprecedented punishment upon them that has led to, again, unprecedented losses to the point of Nasrallah is killed, their arsenal is destroyed. A 40-year investment, not even 20 years, a 40-year investment is degraded to the point where Hezbollah could have been set back to its embryonic stage. How do you get out of this? It's hard for Hezbollah. You could just say, well, accept the ceasefire. But Hezbollah can't, right? Because their whole utility, right? So Hezbollah is it's in Lebanon. It derives support from Lebanese Shiites primarily on the basis, many bases, but primarily that they are a powerful and capable resistance organization. They have a narrative that Israel is this evil, rapacious entity, that, Israelis wake up every morning and they're like, you know what? Ali, I want to bother Ali. I want to kill Ali. Not just any general person, but I want to hurt him. Right? I want to take his land. I want to shed his blood. And that's just the very nature of Israel. So it is according to Hezbollah's narrative. And the only deterrent to that is not Israel's goodwill. It's not that Israel desires peace. No, it's the only deterrent is force, and that force is Hezbollah's. So you have to pretend, you have to project this image that you are capable of fighting Israel, that you are capable of defeating Israel at any time, that you are capable at any and all times to impose terms militarily upon Israel if their evil nature overtakes their common sense, right? In order to have utility to your base. Because your base isn't necessarily 100% ideological. I would say there's a core of Hezbollah's base that are religious and ideologically committed. That's an important factor, right? The religion and the ideological commitment to this concept of wilayat al-faqih, the idea that the supreme leader in Iran is the shadow of God on earth, the voice of God on earth. But that's a core of Hezbollah's membership. To broaden support, Hezbollah attracts support from people who come from, backgrounds, Shiites mostly, but who are not necessarily religious. People who might live lifestyles that you could call, on the surface, Western. They're not, living the good Islamic life. They might drink, they might party, they might, do all things that are forbidden by Islam, but they support Hezbollah for various reasons. And one of the core reasons, the biggest reasons, is this idea of resistance that the Shiites are threatened by ISIS and by Israel. And so if you are revealed as Hezbollah that Israel can impose military terms upon you, and with such ease that the Israelis did, right? This entire war that Hezbollah had promised not only didn't metastasize, but Hezbollah crumpled like a house of cards. I joked with my colleague. I mean, I didn't really feel bad for them. I fought against them in 2006 in the Israeli army, but I joked like I kind of feel bad for them. They're crumpling like this is a joke. Hamas put up a bigger fight. So if that is the case, then this support base, which is supporting you for this idea that you're a capable resistance organization, will say, well, why do we need to support you? You can't even defend us. You can't even fulfill your objective. So they need an out. And this is where the Lebanese state came in. Starting on, I think, October 2nd of 2024, Prime Minister Najib Mikati, caretaker Prime Minister, probably future Prime Minister, House Speaker, Parliament Speaker, rather, Nabi Berri, Shiite, who comes from the Amal Party, which is Hezbollah's rival/ally. They come from different ideological streams, but they merge on this idea of Shiite dignity and Shiite empowerment in Lebanon, so they cooperate with each other. And Druze chieftain Walid Jumblat, who he's a weather vane in Lebanon, and he tends to use that as to be a power broker. Come out and say we are decoupling Lebanon from Gaza. Sounds great, right? That's how a lot of people put it. Look, the Lebanese are turning on Hezbollah. Not quite. To me, I always saw this as giving Hezbollah that face-saving out training, right? And you started to see Hezbollah start to emphasize its Lebanese identity right there. After Nasrallah is killed, and Qasem takes over as interim Secretary General, then he's appointed full Secretary General, and suddenly, and Hezbollah has done this in the past, but it's at moments of strategic necessity, if you will. The flag behind him is the Hezbollah and the Lebanese flag, right? They're emphasizing their Lebanese nature. Their Lebanese links. They start speaking in a more Lebanese fashion, unlike in the civil war in Syria, where their loyalty to Iran, where their Shiite identity came out more strongly. Here, they were stressing their Lebanese-ness. And this gives them an out, right? We're not succumbing to Israeli military pressure. No. As a Lebanese resistance organization, which has Lebanon's best interests at stake, which is ultimately loyal to the government of Lebanon, we're taking orders from the Lebanese government. There's your face-saving out, right? So then we have this November 27th ceasefire, which is hailed as this big sea change, except it isn't. If we go back to Resolution 1701, which was implemented after the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, on paper, it's great law. On paper, if that had been implemented, we never would have had this war. There would be no Hezbollah. Because what does Resolution 1701 require? Requires Lebanon, as the host state of Hezbollah, whether unwilling or not, but it is the host state, therefore has a duty under international law to do so, to push Hezbollah north of the Litani as a preliminary step to deconflict it with Israel, to create a territory between the Litani and the Blue Line, which is the de facto boundary between Israel and Lebanon. It's not a border. That is free of any and all arms that are not those of the Lebanese state or the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL. UNIFIL's job is not to clear the territory, it is to act as an auxiliary force to assist the Lebanese state in that duty. North of the Litani, Lebanon has to disarm Hezbollah and all armed groups. And to prevent their regeneration, it has to control its borders, basically act like a sovereign state, monopolize the use of force in the hands of the state, and control your borders to prevent the emergence of future terrorist organizations. Now, obviously, Lebanon never implemented this. Now, why is that? So we hear from people, there's two dichotomous views of Lebanon that are equally inaccurate. One, which I'm actually a big fan of, once put out in 2016. Naftali Bennett wrote an article that said, Lebanon equals Hezbollah equals Lebanon. It was in the Times of Israel. It's an oversimplification of matters, and it's not accurate. And then you have, conversely, I call them the Lebanese activist clique here in DC, who will tell you that Lebanon is occupied by Hezbollah. Right? That this is a foreign occupation, that we Lebanese, really, we're just fun-loving, partying people. We just want to drink in Beirut and have fun. And, we like to party. We're not like these guys, except that's not true either. In fact, some of the people who like to party and drink are also members of, or not members, but supporters of Hezbollah. So the reality is far more complex. I like to liken Lebanon to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, if we're familiar with how that arrangement is. So you have this site that is holy to Christendom, to Christianity, and you have competing sects. If you've ever walked into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I actually did for the first time a couple of years ago. There's even at the entranceway, there are all these incense burners, and there's one that belongs to each competing church. And each church has, a nook and a cranny, right? And there's a if you've ever walked by it, there's a ladder outside. No one knows where that ladder ever came from, but no one knows who the ladder belongs to. There's no sacred significance to the ladder, but because the ladder is in the territory allotted to one church versus another, God help you, if you move it, there will be the ladder intifada in Jerusalem and no one will be happy. So this is Lebanon, right? Each sect, you have this idea of Lebanon, right? And because there is no unified national identity in Lebanon, power is allotted to sects. And these sects that power is further subdivided along what I would call feudal lines. right? Because each sect is not even united. Each sect has its own subsectarian representatives, and based on this, and they have their popularity is based on this clientelist system. We give you things, you support us. Or maybe you actually ideologically are part of the ideological core of these groups. So this is Lebanon. In Lebanon, Hezbollah is not a marginal actor. In the May 2022 elections, and I love to emphasize these numbers because when we hear talks of Shiite opposition and all this, the numbers just don't add up, right? Maybe I like to hear that there is a Shiite opposition to Hezbollah, right? But I don't want to know what makes me feel good, I want to know the reality. So May 2022 elections, Hezbollah wins 356,000 votes in the parliamentary elections. Now that's out of 1.8 million votes cast, out of a total country of, I'm trying to remember the total number of eligible voters. I think it's probably shortly, so it was double that, right? So about 4 million. Sorry, I'm blanking on the number, hold on. I'm getting the numbers wrong here. But out of 1.8 million votes cast, right? This is out of a country of 4.5 million people. So you're not talking about a negligible number. Now let's make this even more stark. 356,000 votes. They got 15 seats in parliament. Now the Lebanese Forces Party, the main rhetorical opposition, at least to Hezbollah, because it's easy to be an opposition hawk, won 19 seats, and everyone made a big deal out of them in 2022. Except they came in 150,000 votes fewer than Hezbollah. 150,000 votes fewer. So the seat distribution mechanism in Lebanon allotted more seats to the Lebanese Forces Party, fewer to Hezbollah, but if you look at absolute numbers, Hezbollah has more numbers. Now, Lebanon also hasn't had a census since 1932, and even that census was questionable because the sectarian distribution mechanism is built on fictions. It was built on the fiction that up until 1975, well actually 1989 when the Civil War ended, that the Christians were the majority. They weren't. At a certain point it became obvious they weren't, but if you go and check that, and you're like, well actually there's only 30% Christians in this country, but you have political power that it should be allotted to an 80% majority, this doesn't add up. Right? So they're like, well, let's pretend nothing's happening. You know? But as far as we can tell, based on different methods of gathering statistical data, demographic data, the Shiites are Lebanon's largest sect, is the plurality, and they are the fastest growing sect. And they have more babies. They're Lebanon's Chassidim for all intents and purposes. So you have the largest party by number of votes, based on the largest sect and the fastest growing sect in Lebanon. And then let's look at some statistics. January of 2024, Washington Institute put out a poll that said 89% of Shiites strongly support Hezbollah, 93% support them to some degree. So Arab Barometer, which is a polling institute, in September of 2024, showed that 85% of Shiites trust Hezbollah and 5% don't. So you have somewhere between 85 to 93% support. Where is this Shiite opposition that we hear about? And that's assuming that remaining 5 to 7% is cohesive and united and has, they're not, or that they're united against Hezbollah. So there is no such thing as a Shiite opposition. So if you're sitting there and trying to make any decision in Lebanon, you have to do it by sectarian consensus, like we talked about, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I can't touch your ladder, otherwise bad things will happen. So the question of Hezbollah's arms then, to disarm Hezbollah, as required by 1701, as required by the ceasefire, has to be done by consensus. Don't believe me, believe the Prime Minister of Lebanon who said this on December 5th, that we're going to do this by national dialogue and consensus. Believe Walid Jumblat who said this. Believe every single person except for Samir Jaja, the head of the Lebanese Forces Party, who again, it's easy to say this from opposition when you have no practical power. So what does that mean, dialogue and consensus? Meaning we're all going to sit at the table and we have to come to a unanimous decision, including with Hezbollah, to disarm Hezbollah. So effectively you're asking Hezbollah to disarm, and they may be evil, they may be bad guys, they may be terrorists, but I don't know if they're in the business of self-destruction. So this is a non-starter. And anyone who tells you that Lebanon is going to act isn't considering the alternative, which is based on Hezbollah's military strength, based on, and people say, well, it's been diminished. It's been diminished relative to Israel. Has it been diminished relative to the other political forces in Lebanon, where if you're going to act against Hezbollah, it's going to be, if a victory even happens, it's going to be a Pyrrhic victory. Is that worth it for Lebanon? But the alternative is civil war. And again, don't believe me, believe Lebanon's caretaker foreign minister, we'll see if he stays on, in a January 2024 interview where he said, to his interviewer, asking him, what do we do about Lebanon's arms in light of international law and Lebanon's requirements? He said, look, we leave Hezbollah armed. It's regional war. We understand that, right? War with Israel. But that happens what? Once every 20 years? I'm saying this part, he didn't say this part. That happens what? Once every 20 years, lasts 2 months maximum, and then the international community comes in and rebuilds for Lebanon. Okay, so a war every 20 years. That's put that in the calculus of pain over here, right? And then on the other hand, he said, if we go to do what you want to disarm Hezbollah, that's civil war, and that never ends. Meaning, rather than one war every 20 years, you have one war that lasts 20 years, right? And that will never end. So the calculus of pain for Lebanon will always weigh against acting against Hezbollah, because acting against Hezbollah, so long as Hezbollah has this support base, will lead to civil war. And this is where we are today. All these promises that the Lebanese made, they just wanted to get a ceasefire. It doesn't mean that they're okay with having an Israeli war happen. It doesn't mean they're okay with being, having Israel bomb Beirut and different parts of Lebanon. They want to stop that. So what they did this time around what they did in 2006, which is tell the international community, yeah, this time we'll do it. Just give us assets and help the LAF and refund us and do all the things. Basically, it's based on this fiction that the Lebanese state against the other fiction. The Lebanese state and Hezbollah are entirely dichotomous, that they're entirely separate. That if you strengthen Lebanon and its institutions, it will necessarily weaken Hezbollah. Again, this is the other side of the fiction that Lebanon equals Hezbollah equals Lebanon. Hezbollah is part of the government. Hezbollah has a say in the government. By strengthening the government, you alleviate some of the responsibilities that Hezbollah would necessarily have to take upon itself, reconstruction, funding, what have you. So it's not, by strengthening the Lebanese state, you're not necessarily automatically weakening Hezbollah. Because it's not just about resistance for the supporters of Hezbollah. The Shiites in Lebanon have been traditionally disenfranchised. Right? The Maronites, the Sunnis, the Druze, they treated them like they were the second-class citizens of Lebanon. And their traditional leadership used that to empower themselves. They kept their base intentionally ignorant and intentionally poor, and used that to stay at the top. And the old families, the Khalils, the Assads, and so on and so forth. The Husseinis. But Hezbollah comes and says, no, we'll give you dignity. We'll create institutions for you. We'll give you great schools, and they do have great schools, and we'll subsidize them. We'll give you scouts. So by going after Hezbollah's arms in Lebanon, and again, objectively, this has no bearing on whether Hezbollah is an evil organization. I'm talking in the Lebanese context. You go to take Hezbollah's arms, you're telling every Shiite, we are going to restore you to second-class citizenship. That's how it's perceived. So, and the other parties understand that, and whether they love Hezbollah or hate Hezbollah, they understand that civil war is just not worth it for us. Right? Let's just get the Israelis off our backs. Let's get this international aid. Right? It'll carry us over for maybe 5 to 10 years when we can beg the international community for another handout, and we'll just keep on. This has been Lebanon's history. And this is exactly what's happening. And then the international community will stop pressing us because other things will happen. Who's going to focus on Lebanon for the next 5 to 10 years? Right? With war in Ukraine happening, with the war in Gaza. I mean, already the war in Lebanon has taken a backseat to the war in Gaza, which isn't really a war anymore. It's kind of a low-level counterterrorism operation at this point. And then imagine other crises come in. So this is what Lebanon is trying to do. Lebanon is trying to kind of walk under the radar, get itself back to the ability to walk under the radar. Now, how does Joseph Aoun factor into this? There's a big deal made out of his speech, his election and his speech, because it's backed by the United States, by Saudi Arabia, by France, so on and so forth. Times of Israel actually misreported, at least in the headline, his speech is saying he promised to disarm Hezbollah. Not exactly. So Aoun's army was the army commander, no relation to the former president, Michel Aoun. During his tenure, and not just during his tenure as army commander, so we, the United States, have been backing Lebanon's army at least since 2005, right, since the Syrian occupation ended. This whole idea that we strengthen the LAF, Hezbollah weakens. I would challenge anyone to find in this 20-year period now a single instance where the LAF has acted in any meaningful way against Hezbollah that has constrained their operations or their growth in any significant way. You won't be able to find it. Certainly not since the November 27th ceasefire. And including under Aoun's tenure as army commander, where at different times the LAF coordinated, if not sometimes cooperated with Hezbollah. Now again, this doesn't mean the LAF is a captured entity by Hezbollah, but Hezbollah has this legitimacy in Lebanon. And the LAF can only act against Hezbollah, again, where there's consensus. But there is no consensus. The LAF can only act, period, where there's consensus. And there's Lebanese consensus, say, against Sunni terrorists, right? Nusra Front, who had occupied parts of Lebanon up until 2017, ISIS, and so on and so forth. And part of it, at that point, Hezbollah and the battles of Arsel in 2017, the LAF and Hezbollah coordinated, if not low-key cooperated. If you remember in 2019 when an alleged Israeli drone hit Beirut, there was also cooperation in the investigation into where this drone came from between Hezbollah and the LAF. So these aren't entities that are necessarily at each other's throats, even under the vaunted On. Now, how did On get to power? Yes, he was backed by the West, but he also had to get the backing of Hezbollah. So he met with them. I think the election was January 9th. What was that? Was that Thursday, if I'm not mistaken? That Wednesday, he met with Hezbollah's parliamentary representatives. They talked about, according to media reports, reconstruction, security, all these different issues, right? So what's security? This is a keyword for Hezbollah's weapons, right? If I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm going to vote for you, are you going to actually disarm Hezbollah? I think he gave them assurances that he wouldn't. And the next day, you had a parliamentary session, so presidential elections in Lebanon are done through parliament. And Hezbollah's parliamentary delegation in the first round of voting didn't vote for On. He needed, I think, 86 votes to get the presidency. He came in with 71 between Amal and Hezbollah, right? So this is where some people were saying that Amal, under Nabi Hirri, had turned on Hezbollah. In fact, they cooperated together to guarantee shared interests, cast blank ballots, right, as a power move. In fact, Al-Akhbar, which is a Hezbollah mouthpiece, came out and said this was distinctly a power move to demonstrate, even after the assurances that On gave, that you cannot move the political process forward in Lebanon without Hezbollah. So then they voted for him in the second round. He met with them in between two rounds again. So he met with them Wednesday night. Then on Thursday, in between the two voting rounds, he goes, meets with them again, gives them the same assurances, and that's when they say, fine, we'll vote for you. And that's when he got 99 votes. So they made a power move to demonstrate they still control Lebanese politics. So again, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So yeah, well, he did say in his statement that, in his inaugural address, that he intends to monopolize the use of force in the hands of the state. He never mentioned Hezbollah by name. Right? That's aspirational. He also doesn't have the power to do so. Right? The Lebanese president used to, prior to the civil war, as a reflection of Maronite hegemony over Lebanon, have basically almost authoritarian powers. I'm exaggerating the word here. After the civil war, when, again, the Taif agreement was put into effect, this is the agreement that ended Lebanon's civil war, it was meant to reflect sectarian realities, right? The idea that the Maronites were no longer a majority in Lebanon or even a plurality in Lebanon. And so the powers of the president, which is the Maronite office, the Maronites always get the presidency by convention, the Sunnis always get the prime minister, the Shiites always get the house speaker. Its powers were shrunk, and many of those powers were given to the cabinet under the prime minister. One of those powers is the control of the military and the security apparatus. Yes, he is nominally the head of the National Defense Council. Yes, he's nominally the head of the armed forces, the chief, the head of the army. Sorry, but the actual executive is the cabinet. They are the ones that control the army. They are the ones that tell the army, go disarm, go do this, go do that. So there's not been a cabinet formed yet. Right now, the caretaker prime minister is going to be consultations, I think, tomorrow on who's going to be elected. Najib Mikati, the current prime minister, who leans pro-Hezbollah, who remember said we're only going to resolve this issue of Hezbollah's arms through dialogue and consensus, already seems to have 55 votes necessary to become prime minister again. So it seems like he has this clinched. I don't know if any other candidate is going to be able to get that many block of votes. His cabinet is probably going to be a national unity cabinet because this has been Lebanon's convention for at least the last 20 years. National unity means all the parties are going to be there, including Hezbollah, and it's going to be a reflection of both Hezbollah's weight in parliament, again, 15 seats. It's one of the largest parties in parliament at 15 seats, 128-member parliament for reference. And it's going to be a reflection of both their voting turnout and their popularity. So you can't sit there and say we're going to have a national unity government, we're going to keep Hezbollah out even though they have all this weight in Lebanese society. What this means is that Lebanon is going to have a literal seat at the table, and whatever decision the cabinet is going to take is going to have to be taken unanimously because of the dynamic we described earlier, meaning Hezbollah's ministers are going to have to sign off on Hezbollah's disarmament. If you think that's going to happen, I have a very shiny bridge to sell. So that's where we are today. That Lebanon played this game, essentially, the same game they played in 2006. And because of fictions the international community has maintained regarding Lebanon, because of this desire to restore quiet for quiet's sake, and we've seen this trend, the West is tired of war, the United States is tired of war, and I don't think this is a Biden-Trump difference. I don't think President Donald Trump is going to come in and say to the Israelis the green light to, he wants quiet too. There's an exhaustion with war, and on Lebanon specifically, both administrations, Republican and Democratic, have been consistent in maintaining these fictional, or these approaches that are based on the fictions to Lebanon. So I'm not optimistic that Hezbollah, despite the loss of Syria, has lost every and each outlet or opportunity to rebuild. Now, this doesn't mean that they're going to rebuild tomorrow. This doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to, in the immediate term, rebuild to be able to match Israel. It means that they're going to make themselves to focus now on becoming strong enough or remaining strong enough to make any move by other Lebanese unpalatable. Any move against them by other Lebanese unpalatable. This leaves them an opening to slowly regenerate moving forward. So we're not done with this problem. And anyone who tells you otherwise, again, is selling you that shiny bridge.
David, stay right there.
Sorry, I went over a little bit.
No, well, Lebanon is a
lot of moving parts.
PhD dissertation. Can you hear me? I'm wearing this lapel. It's not working. We're all friends here. It's not working?
I can hear you.
But we can hear you perfectly.
I'm sure. Okay. I just want to make sure that, Alex, we're okay? You can hear me? Okay, we've got time for just a few questions. I will begin with the first. A couple of questions. After what you just said about the Lebanese armed forces, great expectations, never delivered. Why is it that we, U.S. and France, continue to, perhaps because there's no alternative, but I'm going to ask the question anyway, why do we continue to throw good money after bad by delivering weapons? There's always a discussion about sending weapons, sending more weapons, as if that can do the job. Sure. Why is it that we continue to do this? Is it we just want it to go away, the problem, or?
Look, I think, well, we'll get into that, but I think to answer the question succinctly, it's because we perceive the problem as one of a lack of capabilities rather than a lack of will. It's a matter of understanding, right? We look at every country. I think we have this problem as the United States, right? I think that, both on the conservative side with the neoconservative outlook, and then on the more liberal side, there's this similar kind of evangelizing, if you will, outlook. The idea is that every country on earth they're just would-be Americans if only we give them the tools being would-be Americans or becoming fully Americans. It's not true. But people cherish their culture, they cherish their history, they cherish their own local traditions. Objectively speaking, yes, would it be better for them to all act like us? Sure. Or to all live like us? Sure. But maybe they don't want that. And this is the primary fiction that I think, if we enable Lebanon just wants to be a successful pro-Western country. And so if we give them the tools, they'll do it. Except Lebanon's far more complex. And then the other side is that the French, who tend to be the tail wagging the American dog in this case, right? They have a very complex relationship with Lebanon. It's almost a step-parent relationship. They created Lebanon. Lebanon is a creation of the French and the Maronites. The current borders were devised by them. The very idea of separating a Lebanon from Syria was a joint French-Maronite conception. When you talk to French diplomats, they still have this kind of almost paternalistic concern for Lebanon, which leads them into such rabbit holes as maintaining the fiction between a political wing of Hezbollah and a military wing, keep conversations with Hezbollah going. And from the French diplomats I've heard, right, they've said, well, this is in our interest in maintaining stability in Lebanon. And I tell them, well, Hezbollah is one of the primary sources of instability, and you, by giving them a green light, help further that instability. But it is this, I think, the French conception with this idea that we must save Lebanon, that Lebanon must be rescued, that if Lebanon collapses, somehow the world will end, which again is not based in reality, coupled with this flawed American approach to foreign policy that if we just give any and all peoples the capabilities, they will become Jeffersonian Democrats overnight. So LAF, they want to, they're ready, right? They don't have a single member that has any sympathy for Hezbollah, which is questionable. I'm not saying it's a captured institution, but soldiers come from all types of different places. I can't imagine there aren't Lebanese soldiers, officers, commanders who have sympathies with Hezbollah. If we just enable them, they'll act. Except we have to. Like you mentioned, it's been 20 years, and not even a single action has been taken. One.
Second question, then we'll go to the floor, relates to what's happening next door. What is the Syria effect on Lebanon,
Sure.
given the takeover by the jihadists next door?
Do you have another 40 minutes? So succinctly, look, Syria was the pathway for Hezbollah to get arms and funds from Iran. When the Assad regime was there, to the extent that he was there, not just a shadow for real Iranian control, as we saw, he crumpled in 11 days. It really was Iran controlling the territory. This facilitated this. Now you have these Al-Qaeda terrorists, repentant, we'll see. I think we need to wait at least 10 years to see if there's actual change, because Al-Qaeda leopards don't change their spots easily. This complicates matters, right? But it doesn't mean it's over for the Iranians. So it's only been a month and a few days since Assad fell. We don't pretend as if it's been 20 years and everything's stable. Look, let's assume Julani had a vision on the road to Damascus and genuinely repented. Again, I'm skeptical. I think he's being tactically pragmatic. Putting that aside, he has other competing factions within this big, revolutionary movement that he has to bring to heel, bring under his unified command. Is he going to succeed, or is this going to go the way of Libya? Remember when we had all those hopes for Libya that it would go a certain way, and then it fractured because you had competing interests? And if it fractures, all Iran needs is chaos. All Iran needs is chaos. It doesn't need Syria to fall apart to total civil war. It just needs some kind of room to maneuver. We're also assuming that Iran won't succeed in reestablishing the same kind of dynamic with the new rulers of Syria, and they've tried to. It's not the first time that Iran and Al-Qaeda terrorists have cooperated. Let me take you back to the 1990s, where they shared information, where Osama bin Laden would meet with Ahmad Boughnieh, who was the chief of staff of Hezbollah, and they would impart information and warfighting methods to each other. So it's not out of the realm of possible. Now, the sectarian blood that's been shed between Sunnis and Shia in Syria will complicate that. But you already see Hezbollah and Iran softening their tone when it comes to Julani. So 3 days, I actually wrote a piece on this, highlighting Naim Qassem, the current Secretary General of Hezbollah, 3 days before Assad's fall, was describing Julani, not by name, but the factions he was controlling as Takfiri terrorists, as agents of the West in Israel, as the end of the world. And then 3 days later, then his speech after Assad falls, all of a sudden Syria has the right to decide its fate freely, which it didn't in 2011 when Hezbollah intervened. We're open to cooperation. We know that Syria is by nature, and this has been consistent in speeches since. So they're trying to come to a modus vivendi with the new rulers in Syria, and that could allow them an opening. But let's assume Julani again has changed, or even hasn't changed, but blocks Iran entirely out of Syria. There's still this thing called the Lebanese coast, right? And if we compare this to Gaza, where you have the Egyptian and the Israeli militaries blockading Gaza for 20 years, and Hamas was still able to build the capabilities that we see today, what makes you think that the Lebanese army or that the UNIFIL contingents from Germany or wherever are going to be able to hermetically seal a much larger coast than Lebanon? And you also have the airport. We can talk about the airport fiction. I hope you do bring that up, whatever happened at the airport a couple of days ago. And the Lebanese, Lebanon's Beirut's ports and other ports. So there is always an opening. So long as the Lebanese state does not act like a sovereign country, there will always be an opening that Hezbollah will be able to exploit.
Okay, a couple of questions. Rob, go ahead.
Thank you for this very detailed presentation and discouraging in many ways. So my question's about the effect of what's going on and the inability to disarm Hezbollah and its effect on Israel and the northern part of Israel, which has basically been depopulated. And is there any outlook for Israelis to return to homes in the far north?
I mean, we know that 50% or so have already returned. Look, people crave normalcy, even under bad situations. And there is a resistance to this. We've seen people come out after the ceasefire deal. It's interesting, Israeli statistics, if you look at polling, most Israelis don't think that Israel won the war against Hezbollah. And a lot of people just didn't think the deal was great, but still, or people who crave normalcy. It's human nature, Israelis are human. I think people who've been displaced from their homes for over a year, if they're given an opportunity, even a questionable opportunity to return to their homes, some may. Others said they wouldn't. We'll see what happens. I think the Israelis, though, will, I asked this question with every Lebanese that I sat with, parliamentarians, activists, what have you. I'm watching this war happen, and I'm hearing a lot of the names of the villages that I fought in 18 years ago. And I thought to myself, like, the day that I was fighting, there were probably kids born that today are fighting in the same villages. And how do I prevent, should I just expect that my son in 18 years is going to fight in those same villages? And of course, you never get a straight answer out of the Lebanon. It's always, it's like in the shul. Right? So the reality is, it probably is going to be that. And I think if the Israelis, if anything needs to come of this, is that the Israelis need to square that very uncomfortable reality dead in the eye and say, this is going to be the situation. We're going to make sure that if Hezbollah is coming back, we're going to make sure an October 7th style attack doesn't happen from the north. Because remember, October 7th, that attack was devised by Hezbollah, their liberation of the Galilee. We're going to make sure that they don't have the capability to do this. The parts of the border fence, the parts of the blue line, there's no fence. Right? There's over-reliance on technology. We saw how that failed when it came to Gaza. So make sure there's high-tech and low-tech capabilities. There are going to be steps that Israel is going to have to take to restore the confidence of its own citizens that you can return safely, even though literally your backyard is going to be, you're going to see Hezbollah right across your backyard. You're going to be able to look, as one resident said, you're going to be able to see the whites of their eyes, but trust your government. I don't know how much that will succeed. This is not a government that, prior to even October 7th, had much trust of the Israeli public. I mean, the judicial overhaul mess that they created, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, it created a seismic shift in Israeli society. And you had even many members of the Likud who started to question the government's utility on a lot of the metrics that they were voted for. Ben-Gvir, look, I don't think Israelis voted for Ben-Gvir in numbers because they suddenly became racist and fascist. He campaigned on a campaign of governance. Right? Mishilut, that was the whole thing. We're going to control crime. What has he done? And then that's all before October 7th happened. So now you compound that with October 7th. You compound it with an inconclusive war in Lebanon. You compound it with a war in Gaza where, yes, still inconclusive. Total victory, I think it is achievable, but it hasn't been fought in the way that it would be achieved. And there's the hostage situation. We're in the yellow pins. Every day they remain in Gaza, there's an erosion of the public's trust in the government. And it's one thing if you lose trust in a government, Israel's democracy. What happens if you lose trust in institutions? What happens if you lose trust in and this is the resistance axis's goal, right? Normalize violence as a day-to-day part of Israeli life, and then, right, okay, fine, violence is here, we'll rely on the idea, Shin Bet will take care of it, Mossad will take care of it, we have these strong arms, the Air Force will take care of it. No, I'm going to make you distrust the IDF and Shin Bet and Mossad's ability to guarantee your safety. Violence is going to happen to you daily, and the IDF can't protect you. If that's sunk in, then we have a real problem.
Anyway, it's time for, unfortunately, we really are running a little bit late. So I think there was, who was it in the back? Jack?
Yes.
Okay, and Larry will be the last question. Go ahead, Jack.
Shifting gears, if I may, to Yemen. In addition to last week's joint exercises, what do you anticipate coming November 20th? Not only to alleviate the terror in Israel, but clearing up the shipping lanes and the fact that boats are now traveling thousands of miles out of their way, driving up costs, clogging the supply lines. What do you anticipate happening?
Look, I think it's hard to predict. President Trump, as we know, is an unpredictable person. In some ways it's an advantage, and in a lot of ways it's a disadvantage. But he's also not the same President Trump that came in 2016. There's a very different base that's propelling him into power. I don't think I've seen I mean, I'm a lifelong conservative, right? I'm a lifelong Republican. I don't think I've seen this much isolationism. And again, I'm not coming from, say, an interventionist Republican standpoint, but there's a strong isolationist wing that is rising, embodied in the person of, say, Tucker Carlson, right? That kind of mentality that why do we need to have fights with Iran? Can't we just cut deals? It's not our problem, it's someone else's problem. His pick, President Trump's pick of J.D. Vance, is a tip, right, to that isolationist wing. It's not a full shift to that, but that wing does have a tremendous influence over him and over his foreign policy, over his policies generally. So is that going to influence his decision in what to do with Yemen? Is he going to, because look, the Houthis are saying, we're going to continue attacking until Israel ends. They're the new Hezbollah. Well, I mean, new old, right? They all have that same narrative. So if you're coming from this isolationist wing, right? If you give into the isolationist wing and you say, I already told you I want this thing done, which President Trump has said. He's like, get it done quickly. He's also said, not contradictory things, but room for maneuver here, right? Get it done the right way. But what if he comes in and says, I want a quiet term. Let's get back to the business of deal making. War in Gaza is over, Israel, right? That'll calm the problem with the Houthis. That's a possibility. I wouldn't discount that possibility entirely. There is also the possibility where we saw in 2020, where Iraqi Shia militias had killed a U.S. contractor of Iraqi origin, and President Trump decided to respond by killing Qasem Soleimani. Right, you kill an American. He's very protective over American lives. We saw that with the case of Austin Tice in Syria, where he was willing to fold up the SDF just because of a deal, or American support for the SDF, just because of a deal that was seemingly promised by the Assad regime to return Austin Tice. He was very protective over American lives. Right? So he's very protective over American interests. Will he go that way? Or will he go a way that says, let's just go the isolationist way? I don't know. I think, but at least having those two possibilities in mind, I think is important.
Can you speak
Very
about
last question, go ahead.
Judea, Samaria?
Yes.
I understand that it's been writing that it could be the next Gaza.
Yes.
And can you speak a little about that and how people have realized the importance of all these settlements or whatever word you want to use? How important it is for the state of Israel?
Look, I mean, the idea that the settlements are the cause of regional destabilization, I don't know where that fiction arose, but it's another fiction that refuses to give way. I think it's, again, because if we say that the cause of the Arab-Israeli war is the settlements, well, that's an easy solution, right? If we say it's much more intractable whether Israel has settlements or doesn't have settlements, it's the
What's
settlement.
the infiltration, though, in
Sure.
that it could become the next Gaza?
Well, so this
Judea,
is
Samaria.
something that Ronen Bar talked about. He's the head of the Shin Bet, and he was telling Prime Minister Netanyahu, he was advising Prime Minister Netanyahu that there needs to be a wide-scale operation, counter-terror operation in the West Bank, because while the rate of attacks has
Judea,
dropped.
Samaria.
Sorry.
Judea, Samaria.
Right. So where he said there's been a dip in the rate of attacks in Judea, Samaria, the lethality and sophistication of the individual attacks has increased, and we've seen over the past. When did Shovel Galim start the operation in the West Bank? I think it was 2021, if not 2022, under the Naftali Bennett government. And Palestinian, like you're seeing names, Palestinian Islamic Jihad has resurged in Nablus, in Jenin, right? These are names you haven't, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades. These are names you haven't heard in 20 years. I felt like I was, a kid again during the Second Intifada. So you're seeing Iran pump weapons and support into the territory. You're seeing increasingly sophisticated attacks, increasingly lethal attacks. And look, this could be a problem. This has been an Iranian objective since 2014. They said they wanted to turn Yehuda v'Shamron into hell for the Israelis. And you have Israel's longest borders with Jordan. Now, the border is not entirely, the Israelis, small army. People think that Israel has infinite capabilities. It doesn't. So you redevote resources to hotter scenes, if you will, and you rely on this new ally, Jordan, to police its territory, except the Jordanians are also spread very, very thin, especially with Syria. That's a much more critical threat for them. So this creates an opening from the Iraqi desert to the Jordanians, and if you've ever been to the Jordanian-Israeli border, at certain points you can literally skip from one point to the next. So weapons smuggling becomes very easy. This is a threat. I don't know how to deal with it. I don't know how to deal with it, but
I
there
know
needs
they're building a hospital now in the Yaman district that creates a nucleus to the area. And I think that we need to do more investment, like this One Israel Fund has just raised a lot of money to finish up this trauma center. And I think this is very important, that we need to understand the importance of that area in relationship to the overall picture.
Look, it's a critical area. And I always say that if the West Bank had been given up, if there had been a Palestinian state in the West Bank, imagine if 10/7 happened from there, right? You're immediately in Jerusalem, you're immediately in Tel Aviv, that's 40,000 people probably killed. So yes, it's an important area. I don't know if there's an easy solution to the terrorism area, unfortunately.
David, thank you very much.